What's up, Retreat Church? I want to drop you guys a quick devotional thought kind of midweek as we're between our 2 weekend gatherings. You know, as we've been going through this series on prayer, I have found myself thinking a lot about time and how I spend it and how we use it. And so I wanted to take just a minute for us to talk about that and kind of reflect on that together. There's this text in Ephesians 5 that warns the church to make the most of our time, to redeem the time because the days are evil or because the time is short. And I really think this whole COVID crisis has helped shine a spotlight for all of us on how we understand our time. And even as I say that, by the way, I know that we come at content like this from different unique perspectives, and you guys hear and engage ideas like that differently. I know some of you are frontline workers or essential workers or healthcare workers, and your time feels hectic and maybe even scary and anxious, and you probably have less of it than you normally have. And at the same time, some of us are white-collar workers who've been sent to work from home, and lack of commutes and maybe lightened workloads have left you with more free time than you've had in years. And I know some of you have had your hours reduced, or you've been laid off or furloughed, and the sheer amount of time you have maybe feels like it's mocking you as you think back on time you spent providing and working for you and for your family. I know that all our experiences are different, but one thing is universal. It's common amongst us all, and that's that we live in strange times. Our time is different than it was just a few short weeks ago. So what a great opportunity to consider prayer in our life. You know, I've said this a couple times in the pulpit, but prayer is a hard spiritual discipline for me. I read about our forebears in the faith who spent hours daily in intercessory prayer, and it both humbles and shames me, right? Like, I struggle to give continuous, dedicated attention to my prayer life. And in the midst of all this, one thing I've come to know for certain is that struggle is not because of lack of time. Don't get me wrong, I'm more busy than I've ever been. But in the last several weeks, I have somehow found time for so many things. I found time for TV shows I love. I found time for video games, for play with my kiddos. I found time for exercise and enjoyment of the weather with my family. I found time to work on projects and hobbies. I found time for plenty of things, good and bad, and I'm sure you guys have as well. You know, I had a mentor in ministry that said the idea that there just isn't enough hours in the day to get everything done is a lie. Right? God made the day, and God made the hours, and God made the tasks. And if you don't have enough hours to accomplish all your tasks, then you're giving yourself to tasks that God didn't assign to you. It's this idea that the challenge we face is not having enough time, but honoring God with the time we've actually been given. We talked this Sunday about abiding in Jesus as simply staying connected to him. Knowing what he said, knowing what he desires, knowing what he loves, and connecting yourself to those things. As I've thought about this, I abide in all sorts of things. You know, I stay connected to the things I care about. Stay connected to the news and the world through social media and the internet. I stay connected to my wife and my family through affection and conversation. I stay connected to friends through time spent together and shared activities. I abide in all sorts of things. And you know what it takes to do that? A big fat chunk of my time. And somehow I managed to do it. Better than others sometimes, right? But I figure it out. And yet, often, when it comes to abiding in Jesus, I either feel that I don't have enough time, I'm too busy this morning to connect with Jesus. I've got to jump onto this meeting. I've got this project. I've got to make sure I contact this person. Or it's simply too hard a time. I'm distracted. I'm thinking about what I would rather be spending my time doing. And all this comes back to the reality that we have the time that we have, and we get to allocate it how we wish. We will abide in Jesus if we want to. He'll get our time if we want him to. Plenty of other stuff does, because we want it to. Which leads to a really great and kind of awful question. Do you actually want to give Jesus your time? I mean, honestly, ask yourself that, right? Like, do you actually want to give Jesus your time? I know for me, the honest answer is sometimes. I'm a mixed bag of holiness and sinfulness. Sometimes I desire nothing more than to connect to Christ, and I need to be encouraged to allocate my time to his glory, but sometimes I just don't want to. I don't want to give him my time. I want to give it to other things, and I begrudge time that I do give to connecting to him. So what the heck is a sinful contradiction of motivations like you and like me to actually do? How do we engage this hard reality? I think prayer is this beautiful and simple answer. I'm reminded of this book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. He talks about people's propensity to try and change their lives with huge sweeping commitments and changes. You know, I'm going to work out 2 hours a day, 7 days a week, starting this morning. Things like that, huge commitments like that. It feels good, it sounds good, but we all know that doesn't actually work. You may give some energy, some willpower to it for a season, but usually when we try and make massive, huge, sweeping changes, we just end up fizzling out. We have a hard time following through. Human beings have a hard time changing rapidly. We change by slow, gradual adjustment. Clear challenges us to think less about huge, sweeping actions and think more about trajectory. Think of it like this. Compare today to yesterday. Is your today more or less pointed toward your goal? It doesn't matter if it's 80% more or 1% more. Is it simply more or less pointed toward your goal than your yesterday was? It's cool. It's a good book. You should read it. It's encouraging. But I think this idea applies to our faith and applies to our prayer life in some really specific and encouraging ways. If you and I wake up tomorrow dedicated to spend 2 hours pre-sunrise, mind you, in dedicated intercessory prayer, the reality for me at least, I don't know how it would be for you, but the reality is that we're likely setting ourselves up for failure. But prayer doesn't have to be big and dramatic like that. It's about connection to Jesus. It's about abiding. And do you know what's amazing about abiding and about connection? It doesn't have to be big and dramatic. You know, sometimes if you're married, you take a date with your wife, you drop the kids off, you make a big to-do, you spend a lot of money. It's a whole thing. It takes up a ton of time, and that's beautiful and that's appropriate. But sometimes connecting to your spouse is just shooting them a text on the way home from work to let them know you're stopping somewhere and you're going to be a few minutes late. Both are connections. Both build relationship. Both create abiding. So think about trajectory. Do you want to abide in Jesus more? Do you want to grow in your faith? Do you want to grow in your prayer life? What points you more in that direction today than yesterday? Did you forget to pray at all yesterday? Okay. Pray for 2 minutes today. Seriously. That changes your trajectory. Tomorrow you can make it 5, or you can pray for 2 minutes twice at 2 different times. Allow yourself the freedom to make small connections, and you will see your heart grow in desire and affection for deeper and bigger connections. you'll see your heart turn toward more and more abiding and more connection. You'll begin bit by bit to prioritize more and more of what you actually want, which is connection with Jesus. And don't get me wrong, it will take your time. And by the way, it will take more and more of your time the more and more you connect with Jesus. Man, it is so worth it. It's so worth it. It's so worth it. Beloved, you only have the time you have. Make the most of it. Redeem it. Because the days are short. Love you guys. We'll see you throughout this week through whatever connection points we have. And Lord willing, we'll see you this Sunday at our gathering. Be blessed.